Welcome to Cents and Sensibility, where we like to talk about money without the stress. My name is Chris. I'm here with my good friend.
I'm Phil.
So in today's episode, we're going to be diving into a topic that affects millions of people, student loans. For most of us, loans are the only way to afford college, but they come with a series of serious strings attached to them, right? So if you don't understand how they work, they can follow you for decades or the rest of your life, essentially, eating up your paycheck all the time or a big chunk of it. And by the end of this video, you'll know the real cost of student loans, the mistakes to avoid, and how to make borrowing smarter and less painful. So point one to think about is how student loans really work, right? At their core, student loans are borrowed money to pay for school. But here's the catch, right? Loans aren't free. Nothing in life is essentially free except for like maybe air or water or something, but they come with interest, which adds to the total cost of the borrowed amount, right? As an example, let's say you borrow $30,000 for school at 6% interest rate, and it takes 10 years to pay it back. By the time you're done with school or even just paying it off, you'll have paid over $39,000, and that's nearly $10,000 in just interest on top of what you've already paid back. And so a tip I like to tell people when it comes to borrowing is that before you borrow, use a free loan calculator. There's a bunch of them online to just basically see how much you'll owe total, including interest. It's a great way to understand what you're signing up for before signing up. And an extra thing to think about when you're signing up for student loans, federal loans tend to have lower interest rates and more flexible repayment options than private loans. If you have to borrow, prioritize federal loans first before private loans.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point about student loan debt. And that brings us into number two, guys, which is the long-term impact of student loan debt. It doesn't just cost you money, but it also can delay some of life's biggest milestones, like buying a house, starting a family, or even saving for retirement. So, we had a viewer who shared with us that they were spending $500 a month on their loan payment, which meant he couldn't really save for a house, and he was in his mid-30s. So that loan wasn't just a number on paper, it affected his entire life plan. So a supporting tip I like to give people is try to keep your student loan payment under 10 to 15% of your monthly income, and that's after you graduate. So the lower your payment, the more financial freedom you'll have, and the more you'll be able to use that money elsewhere. So, delaying that loan payment may seem tempting at first, but, the interest is going to catch up with you if you keep delaying it. So, you're going to want to make sure you're keeping your payments steady and you're making them, and this keeps accruing over time. So that way you'll be able to pay off the debt in a good, timely manner. So a $30,000 loan deferment, for a few years can quickly grow to $35,000 or more. So you want to make sure you're starting these payments on time. You want to get your payment as low as possible so you have the financial freedom, but you're going to want to try to avoid delaying any payments if you can, because delaying loan payments may seem tempting, but interest often keeps accruing. So the longer you delay it, the more interest you're going to end up paying. So let's say you have a $30,000 loan that you keep deferring. A few years can go by and soon you're going to owe $35,000 or more. And that's just going from the interest and deferring the payments. So if you can avoid it, I would recommend that you start on those payments as soon as possible.
That's a great point, Phil, in regards to, the long-term negative effects of student loans, which, obviously brings us to point number three, right? Which is mistakes to avoid when borrowing. Borrowing for education can be smart, but too many people take on debt, honestly, without understanding what they're committing to. Mistake one, right, is borrowing more than you need, right? So a good example of this would be, let's say, one student borrowed an extra $5,000 each year to cover living expenses. So by the time graduation came, they owed like an extra $20,000 more than tuition, and they paid thousands of more dollars in interest on that $20,000, right, on top of their tuition. So just think about that. When it comes to borrowing, a tip I like to tell people is only borrow what you absolutely need for tuition and for books. Look for part-time work, scholarships, or grants to help cover living expenses or offset those costs. Another mistake people run into, ignoring interest while in school without an unsubsidized loan. Another mistake I see people run into when it comes to borrowing, when it comes to school, is ignoring interest while they're in school. With unsubsidized loans, interest starts accruing right away. There's no waiting. There's no, hey, it's going to wait till after the fact or after graduation. A $10,000 loan can easily grow to $11,000 or more before you even graduate. A tip to avoid this from happening, let's say, if possible, make small interest payments while you're in school to keep the balance from just ballooning and getting too out of control and getting away from you. The last major mistake that I see a lot of people run into is not exploring repayment options, right? So federal loans offer options like income-based repayment or loan forgiveness for certain jobs, right? So don't assume you're stuck with a plan that doesn't work for you.
Yeah, that's a great point, which brings us to number 4, which is some smart borrowing tips for you guys. You know, education is an investment, but you can minimize the financial strain it has on you by being a smart borrower. So tip 1, guys, is to apply for scholarships and grants. You know, I knew a student who worked and applied for a couple of these small scholarships, and they were able to get another $2,000 of their college paid for just by applying for these grants. And, you know, that's $200 less that they had to borrow. So it not only saved them time up front, but it also saved them in the long run with the interest. So if you can apply for the scholarships and grants, you never know what you're going to get approved for. So I would start there. And another tip for this is to consider community college or in-state schools. So you don't have to necessarily go to one of these big name schools right off the bat. You can knock out a lot of the simple classes at, let's say, a community college or a cheaper state school, and then you could transfer. So that's a good way to save money. So, you know, you could start at a community college and transfer that savings into going to a better college in the long run.
Are you dealing with student loans, or are you thinking about borrowing for school? What's one of your biggest challenges that you've faced so far? Go ahead and drop it in the comments and let's figure this out together. So don't forget, student loans can be open doors for better education, but they come with long-term costs. Know what you're borrowing, avoid the common mistakes, and look for ways to minimize your debt so your future self will thank you. And as always, if you found this video helpful, hit that like and subscribe button and share it with someone who's planning for college. And don't miss our next video where we'll talk about credit cards and how they can be both your best friend and your worst enemy if you're not careful. And as always, keep your cents and sensibilities in check.